Hello and welcome to the edition of Radio Yes Cymru with me, Sean Jobbins, on your favourite podcast apps and also on the Yes Cymru YouTube channel. We're discussing this evening a new book called Dros Gymru'n Gwlad by Arwel Vittle, my guest today, with Gwen, Gruffudd. Dros Gymru'n Gwlad's History of the Foundational Plaid Cymru is a new book out in Welsh. And just to let you know, the title Dros Gymru'n Gwlad is the opening line of the essentially Plaid Cymru anthem, which is sung to Sibelius's Finlandia tune. So if you ever hear people singing Finlandia in Welsh, Dros Gymru'n Gwlad, for Wales, our country, is the opening line and one of the verses. So it's a very well-known line in Welsh. Arwel, welcome to the podcast. Obviously, Plaid Cymru was founded in 1925, so it's 100 years since then in August. Why, apart from that, why did you decide to write this book with Gwen? Was it something you've been thinking about for a while?
Yeah, both of us have been discussing it for a few years, and we felt that we wanted to tell the story of the founding of Plaid Cymru, but also something which is overlooked is quite often is the fact that the founding members were very young.
Yeah,
They were in their 20s and early 30s. Because when you think about people like Saunders Lewis, DJ Williams, Lewis Valentine, who are sort of nationalist icons in a way, people see older pictures of them, sepia-tinged pictures of older men.
yeah,
And the truth is that they were in Saunders Lewis, for example, was 32 when the Blight
yeah,
was founded. So we wanted to give a fresh a look to take a fresh look
yeah,
at the founding of the Blight, and also to place it in its context
yes,
of the 1920s, which was a very turbulent and exciting time in
yeah,
both the arts with the advent of modernism and also political developments on the continent, where you had the rise of fascism and communism, and also closer to home, you had the rise of the Labour Party in Britain, and also in Ireland, you had the War of Independence
yeah.
and the setting up of the Irish Free State.
Yeah, so this is something which I think the book, which I hadn't really contemplated before, is that Plaid Cymru really is part of this pan-European movement, sometimes
Yeah,
consciously in the case of Saunders Lewis, who did
yeah,
see himself after being in the First World War as having more. He had great affinity with French people, so when he was a soldier in France, billeted in France, he found himself getting on very well with French local people, but just couldn't get on so much with his fellow, mostly English soldiers, even though Saunders was raised in Liverpool. So I think the modernism is very important. So just to get people maybe to context, so Plaid was founded in 1925.
mm,
Uh, Welsh identity had been, I would say, quite an ethnic identity until the late 1900s. Basically, everyone knew they were Welsh because they spoke Welsh.
mm,
Um, but the idea of a Welsh nationality wasn't something which quite clicked. So you'd have people in the early 19th century say, we're English, even though they were Welsh. So this idea of Wales being a nation wasn't so clear. By the end of the 19th century, the idea of the home nations takes root.
mm,
And in 1890, well, 1890s, we have Cymru Fydd, which is Young Wales, which is a branch of the Liberal Party. And that comes around abruptly in a famous meeting in Newport in 1896, where Mr. Byrd says that the cosmopolitan part of Wales, which in Welsh
mm,
speak usually means something non-Welsh, as in
yeah.
not be ready to speak Welsh, won't accept Cymru Fydd. That's Cymru Fydd sort of dies. You then have some efforts to have some kind of home rule back on the agenda for the Liberal Party before the First World War. E.T. John, a wonderful man, but rather boring, writes a very good bill for the House Commons in
Mm,
March 1914 for the
14, yeah,
Parliament for Wales. Excellent paper, almost exactly the same as today, except for TB. That obviously
yeah.
doesn't get any further. Then the First World War starts. And then essentially the First World War and the Irish War independence are what is what changes politics in Wales forever, essentially, with founding
It
Plaid Cymru.
it does, yes. The Great War in particular, and in the book we take the example of two of the founding fathers of the Plaid, Saunders Lewis, as you mentioned, and Lewis Valentine, the first president. And Valentine in particular, he was trained to be a Baptist minister in Bangor, but he wanted to travel Europe first of all
Yeah,
to taste the academic cup, as he says, going to the Sorbonne and Heidelberg. But the Great Wars destroyed all that, and as part of his experiences in the war, he became disillusioned to the point of hating the English officer class and their attitude towards his fellow Welsh soldiers. And he was severely injured in Passchendaele and was sent to recuperate in a sort of hospital come military camp in Northern Ireland. And it was there that he came into contact with members of Sinn Féin. And he was really impressed by their nationalism and their steadfastness. And he even considered joining them. He didn't,
yeah,
obviously, but it's dramatic, isn't it, in a way, when you think about it, that a Protestant Welsh Baptist minister considered joining an Irish Republican Party. So
yes. And it's just, yes, he feels he has more in common with the Irish Catholics
yeah,
than the Irish Protestants, the
yeah,
Unionists. And similarly, Saunders Lewis was raised in Liverpool to, again, a Welsh minister, but essentially, had the war not happened, I think he'd have been an Englishman. Essentially, he studied English, obviously, at Liverpool University. He goes to the war. He speaks French, but he finds he gets on better with French peasants, if you like, or
yeah.
local people
Yeah,
where he's
exactly.
native.
He enjoys the company of the French people and French citizens much more than his fellow soldiers from England.
Yeah.
And he makes a comment about the way that the English, wherever they go, they colonize places.
Yeah,
He felt that they'd colonized Le Havre, for example,
yeah.
with their presence in the town. So,
So I mean, so the war has a personal effect on people, but I think as a societal situation, it just changes the whole society, doesn't it? So I mean, it shakes the if you look at Edwardian Wales, it's such a confident place in many respects. Population is booming, there is Eisteddfodau everywhere.
hmm,
Wales with Lloyd George feels they've been recognised as part of the union, but in other ways, very lack of confidence in Welsh, and the people will not think of pushing Welsh in education or anything. So the war shakes people up, and I think the war fighting for the small nations, especially for Belgium, I'm surprised it didn't click with more people. But for a lot of people, think, well, if we're fighting with this small nation, what's our small nation here in Wales getting? And then you just say in the book, the Irish War of Independence just shakes them, where people say actually the Irish haven't played the Westminster game. They haven't done the
yeah,
Cymru V. They haven't done the E.T. John of playing pretty please, will you give us a parliament?
yeah,
They've said, sod you, we'll take our own parliament. And they've won. So they've gone
yeah.
for the maximalist position, and they've won. Obviously, for some people, it's not enough. Still not a republic, but a free state, as
Yes, I think you
Michael
put your
Collins
finger
right to
on
say,
it
was the,
there.
the
That is the essential influence, I think, that
yeah,
the template that Ireland offers these young Welsh nationalists or new Welsh nationalists, because Welsh nationalism had been more of a cultural phenomenon
yeah,
in the early part of the 20th century than political, and these young people that we mentioned, they think of Wales as a political nation. They want to see Wales grow up and
yeah.
become a political nation and join other nations, as you mentioned, in Europe, who gain their freedom.
Yes, and of course, at this time, 1920s, you would have seen places like Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania become independent. Countries which you literally would never have heard of even
Hmm.
before the First World War. And in the case of Estonia, they didn't even they weren't even campaigning for independence. So this would have been a shock to people looking at this kind of situation. So, so I say the disaster of the First World War, the carnage of the war, the feeling of the futility of British imperialism,
Hmm.
um, and then at the same time being imperial, but also fighting for the rights of small nations. This
Yeah.
irony struck with young nationalists. I think certainly the example of Ireland, that they'd actually just decided, sorry, we're not listening. Then we're not playing this game anymore. And
Yeah.
it's a lesson today, people. People still playing the Westminster game. Reform,
Yeah, so
Labour, Tory, Corbyn, it's all part of the Westminster Uni Party.
yeah.
They all put Wales second. So they put up with that. Saunders and Valentine obviously quite instrumental people, but who are the other people who are joining Plaid Cymru? So as you say, there were various groups. Sorry, I'm trying. This is quite exciting in Wales, 1920s. So in any case, I mean, you have these little societies, people publishing stuff in Welsh about the economy, about education, how to improve it, how to improve agriculture. You have groups starting at last to look at the Welsh language because the census 1921 is a shock for people because of
Yeah.
decline in Glamorgan and Gwent. And they're trying to look at more like scientific ways more than, oh, please speak Welsh, be nice to us, and please give us a Welsh parliament, be nice to us. People are starting to look at things a bit more, well, modernist in a more structured way. So who are the people coming into the Plaid in 1925 and how does it come about?
Well, amongst some of the other founding members, you had somebody like DJ Williams, for example. He went to college in University in Aberystwyth and subsequently went to Oxford. And he during his time in Aberystwyth, for example, in the middle of the Great War, he wrote an article in the student magazine praising not only the Germans but also Sinn Féin and conscientious objectors, which were the three bêtes noires of British nationalism in that
Yeah.
time. But
And DJ was a member of the Independent Labour Party as well.
yes, I was going to say, yeah, he after leaving college, he became a teacher in Fishguard, and he was very active in the ILP in Pembrokeshire. Campaigning for Willie Jenkins, who was a pacifist and socialist. So DJ was more of a socialist than a nationalist initially,
Yeah.
but even he came to see that there was a need for a party that would fight solely for Wales and not, as you say, play the Westminster game.
Yeah. So, and the other people, I'm presuming, are from a sort of liberal background, so their parents are voting liberal essentially, and maybe they would have before the war.
Yeah, well, somebody like Valentine, for example, his father had a portrait of Lloyd George in his Chancellor of the Exchequer robes above the fireplace at their home in North Wales. But also there were people in the quarrying areas of Arfon, notably a young man, H.R. Jones, who was from Dainiolen. And he believed fervently in the need for an independent party that would fight for Wales. He was inspired by Ireland, as most of these young nationalists were. But and so he set about trying to establish one in Caernarfon, organised meetings here, and corresponded with anybody who he thought would sympathise with it. And so he sort of set up a fledgling party in 1924. But the meetings in Caernarfon were characterised by just a quarrelling and nitpicking, with everybody having their own road to salvation for the nation. So.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a very practical movement that was set up in Caernarfon.
Yeah, so we have a combination of people who have some political experience in other parties, but most of them don't. People come mostly from the left in Wales. I think that's where the whole movement has been since since Cymru Fydd essentially is born from that sort of liberal tradition, and then also bringing in more socialist tradition. And bringing in, so what you have in the early 20s is various groups of people trying to do their bit for Wales, for the language. And of course, this is time really before telephone and before cars to a large extent. So people are trying to communicate by letter mostly. And you have a group of people up in the Caernarfon area. And then, interestingly for me, Cardiff, Penarth, Barry, which you wouldn't expect at that time. So there are some intellectual people around there, Welsh speaking, who congregated there in Cardiff with work, whatever. They're also talking to each other, but sometimes they don't even know about the other group's existence or barely know about them. Is that true to say?
Yes, I think that's true. They're not aware of each other because traveling between North and South Wales is
Yeah,
is difficult. It's
yeah,
still difficult, but
yeah,
it was harder still in that time, I think. And there is, as you say, a group of Welsh-speaking intellectuals gathering around Cardiff and Barry, and amongst them are four or five people who set up their own movement, namely Saunders Lewis, Ambrose Bebb, Griffith John Williams, and his wife Elizabeth. They meet in Griffith John's home in Penarth, and they decide to set up a sort of semi-clandestine movement called the Mudiad Cymreig, which translates as the Welsh movement. Um, and yes, and I should say they were pretty quick to invite DJ Williams, who we mentioned previously,
yeah,
into their movement. But it soon became clear that to Sons Lewis in particular that this movement wasn't going to go very far on its own, and it needed another vehicle to move the national cause forward, and that's what it led eventually to the movement in Penarth joining up with the one in Caernarfon and forming the Plaid Genedlaethol, the Welsh Nationalist Party as we know it today.
yeah. So Plaid Cymru, the National Party of Wales, if you like, was founded in Pwllheli in August 1925. So celebrating the centenary this year at the Eisteddfod. Um, I was always struck that Saunders Lewis is the most well-known figure from this period. So again, a man from raised in Liverpool, son to a minister, essentially on the way to becoming English when I think the First World War hadn't happened, became part of the officer corps, fought in the war, had a good war in one respect, came out alive, uh,
Mhm.
decided not to kill a German sentry guard, though he could have, because he felt that the man was unarmed or wasn't ready to fight. Um, Comes out and he becomes quite a Francophile. He speaks French. He's rather disappointed, disgusted with the ways the British Army is looking at the French people. He felt more in common with the French peasantry, the French people when he's billeted out there, and he decides to put a stamp. Now, most of the party is sort of ILP liberals type. Saunders has a much more European outlook. He feels
Yes,
in the
yeah.
war that he's a part of Europe. He sees this link, which is something the war does to him. Sees Wales as a part of European, as a European nation, but he's also not the he's not a pacifist like DJ. He's not so much on the left. How did Saunders become to be such an important figure in Plaid Cymru and become the leader?
Well, I think one of the reasons, there are many, perhaps too many to discuss this evening, but that one of the reasons is what I referred to previously about the group in Caernarfon's disorganisation.
Yeah,
What Saunders Lewis brought to the movement was a stress on the importance of discipline
yeah,
and unity, and for people not to just go on and chasing their tails in a way,
yeah,
discussing home rule and the future of the language or whatever. And so he impressed many of the other people I've mentioned, like H.R. Jones, like Lewis Valentine, and even D.J. Williams, the Israel socialist, that with even though Saunders Lewis's vision was conservative, small c,
yeah,
his emphasis on discipline and his political vision,
yeah.
if you wish, impressed them, and unity and putting Wales first meant that he got their support.
Yeah, I think this is quite maybe something we don't comprehend now because it seems so obvious to us. But I mean, if you're looking at Welsh nationalism, if you could call it that, before Plaid Cymru, it's very nebulous. It's a bit like saying, we want the we want women's rights, but there's nothing about which laws you're going to get
Yeah,
women's rights. It's like
yeah,
we want
yeah.
workers to have better rights, but there's nothing about employment law. There's nothing about minimum wage. There's nothing about minimum hours. So what's that is a bit like this. Wanted workers' right things to be better for workers, but actually no policy about how that actually happen or strategy about gaining that. So what Founding Plaid Cymru does, in a way, is it forces Welsh people to become more scientific, for want of a better word, in trying to work out exactly what they want, which is what Saunders lays out in 1926 with Egwyddorion Cenedlaethol, so the
Yeah.
principles of nationalism,
Nationalism. Yeah.
um, and give some kind of structure which there hadn't been before. There's this incredibly romantic idea that we would like to see more people speak Welsh, and we'd like our children to speak Welsh, and please pass the language on to your kids.
Yeah.
But nothing then
Yeah.
about having Welsh medium schools or
Yeah. Well, so does
education.
nationalism in Wales before then really had been infused with a lot of sentimentality.
Oh,
Even Cymru Fydd
yeah,
it was quite, as I said, a sentimental nationalism, a cultural nationalism
yeah,
also has. Sorry, Welsh nationalism manifested itself more in the cultural sphere than in the
yeah,
political sphere. And what the founding of Plaid Cymru does is it creates a political nationalism for the first time really.
yeah.
Um, and
Uh,
yeah, so
it's
uh, yeah, go
yeah.
on.
Sorry, you carry on.
Well,
It's a
what I was going to
yeah,
say, Saunders Lewis is one of his pet hates was sentimentalism
yes,
in politics, and
yeah,
he says somewhere in that period that one of the in the early 1920s that one of the greatest burdens or in Welsh life and political life is sentimentality, and
yeah,
I think that also appealed to other people, like we mentioned, who'd been through the Great War and who'd seen, as you say, Ireland getting
yeah,
some sort of freedom anyway. That you can't be sentimental in politics, really.
yeah. And I mean, of course, sentimentality is still a big thing. I mean, the Labour Party is all very happy with sentimental Welshness, and singing Canon Lan in a pub is great, but actually, as one in powers for Crown Estate or
Oh,
judiciary,
exactly. It's still
that's
here,
not.
isn't it? I mean,
Yes,
yeah,
this nonsense about little old
yeah.
Wales and and this is partly with rugby. So I mean, so Pride is formed. First World War, which just shakes things up in any case. Ireland becoming independent. So I think the other big tenement then is the disappointment stroke disgust with what happens after the war. So there's talk, so people forget this after the war, partly because of what happened in Ireland, partly also because it was discussed before the war about something like home rule all round.
Hmm.
So Scotland is talking about some kind of parliament, and Wales. Lloyd George has typically just been two-faced and just been totally thinking of his own career. He tells the Welsh pro devolutionists, we call them today, pro home rule, or go for the big thing. They get a Royal Commission looking at some kind of parliament for Wales. Had Lloyd George just given us Secretary of State in 1922, it would have totally changed Wales in such a
Hmm.
fundamental way. So people feel that Lloyd George has strung them along, played the game. People feel the Labour Party also who trying to get people who also talk about home rule but never quite delivered.
Yeah, well, Wales promised, sorry, Labour promised Wales home rule as part of the home rule all round in the early 1920s.
Yeah,
And there's a story we talk about in the book related by Mai Roberts, who was a private secretary to E.T. John, the ex
yeah,
MP, who'd left the Liberals to join Labour, and who was trying to be persuaded to stand in an election in Brecon. And she says that Ramsay MacDonald and Arthur Henderson, who were prominent members of the Labour Party, and of course MacDonald became Labour Prime Minister eventually, tried to persuade him to stand, saying, "Oh, if you stand, we'll put a pledge to establish a Welsh Secretary of State in our manifesto." And of course, well, he stood, even though Mai Roberts told him not to, or suggested
yeah,
that he shouldn't. But when Labour came to power in 1929, they didn't give anything of the sort to
yeah.
Wales.
So yeah, so it's a bit like today with many other things. So I mean, basically, so there's First World War, seeing Ireland who just said, sod it, we're going to do it ourselves. And then seeing, that the British Party is still playing games
Hmm.
and wouldn't sort of prioritize Wales. I mean, the argument would be, 1920s, you had, the Great Depression, the more pressing things, people literally, without work. But there's always an excuse in there. So, I mean,
Yeah.
and so there's always some kind of reason not to do these things, which never top up.
Yeah, and another factor that made these people determined to set up the party was a lack of faith in British parties' promises.
Yeah,
And again, you had to do these things yourself if you
yeah,
want to get if you want to achieve something, if you want to keep your eyes on the prize and set up your own party in
yeah.
to fight for Wales, and don't expect others to do so, and don't expect the favours of others.
Yeah, and I think that's the lesson they'd learned. I think it's actually so important that Pride was formed, and I wish it had been formed earlier, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, because what you see from 1920s onwards was a diminishing and a rowing back on Welsh nationality. So, we used to have a Welsh cricket club. We were a cricket nation. There was a Wales cricket team until 1930s. That sort of
Mm.
disbanded. It's amazing in a way that there was football team. I think just because of Scotland
Yeah.
continued.
Yeah.
But there'd been some incremental wins in terms of education and O.M. Edwards and
Mm.
stuff. Those are sort of frozen. There's no new developments in terms of Welsh nationality, almost 40 years.
No, Welsh
Uh,
identity is in retreat
yes,
after the First World War, and
yes,
this
and it's
again
all,
was a reaction which led to setting up Plaid Cymru. I
yes.
think.
And I think if Pride hadn't been set up, it'd been even worse. I mean,
Yes, I think so.
uh,
Yeah.
and everything is incremental, isn't it? We don't, Cardiff becomes a capital in 1955, which is partly the way the Tories not giving us a
Mm.
Secretary of State, which eventually comes with the new Labour
Mm.
government in
Mm.
1964. But
Yeah,
that's
I think it's
40
an important
years.
point you just made about it would be worse if the Blight hadn't been set
Yeah,
up. I think even though they didn't achieve any major electoral success for quite a while,
yes,
their influence was pretty as intellectually and with regard to preserving a sense of Welsh political identity was essential in the period before and after the Second World War,
yeah.
really.
Yes, I mean, you only have to look at the pamphlets written by DJ Davis,
Oh yeah,
another DJ, on the economy 1930s. So he's pretty the only person anywhere in Wales with his fantastic wife, Noel French
yeah,
Davis, who's an Irish woman,
yeah.
uh, on the Welsh paper. And you can get these papers sometimes in second-hand bookshops, but it's
Mm,
really worth you getting hold of DJ Davis's the economics of Welsh self-government. One comes
mm,
out 1936, another 1942, something like that. But
yeah,
they're fantastic pamphlets, and this is done by people in their spare time. Uh,
yeah.
essentially a think tank, which is done by people in spare time, because the universities aren't doing their job, of course. And so, but Pride gives that kind of weight then towards discussions. And of course, the organs of the party, Rai Goch, essentially, and then Welsh Nation become quite important. Intellectual papers to start out, a different pathways could be taking.
Yeah.
Um, Arwel, I mean, I'm just going to leave with this question, and maybe you've answered it, but are there any characters except the famous ones, the Saunders Lewis and
Yeah.
stuff, which you've warmed to, or you think they haven't had the respect they've had, or that people don't remember them in the way we should have when you
Well,
came to
there
write
are
the
quite a
book?
few, but the one that's struck me most, or struck us most, is Maya Roberts. As I mentioned, she was E.T. John's private secretary, but she also came from the same village as H.R. Jones in Arfon, from Deiniolen, and she knew H.R. And in the capacity as private secretary, she also organised the Celtic Congress. And in one of those in Brittany, she met Ambrose Bebb, who was one of the members of the Mudiad Cymreig. And eventually, to cut a long story short, she came into contact with Saunders Lewis. And she was in effect the go-between between Saunders
Right.
Lewis and H.R. Jones, which led to the amalgamation of the Southern movement and the party in the north, which led to a unified Plaid Cymru being formed in Pwllheli in 1925. So
Yes.
she's quite a character. She was a representative of the modern age, really. She was
Yeah.
a young woman. She had her own car. She drove. She smoked. She wore makeup, and she was quite a sophisticated woman. So and
Yeah.
she's quite a character, which she hasn't had the attention she deserves, really.
Yeah. And that's the other thing, because if you look at the pictures, you see many young women there And it's also a time when you start to get more young women taking part in, but more prominent part in
Mm.
Welsh cultural life as well, in terms of writing, in terms,
Yeah,
and there's music. Well, Morfudd Llwyn
yeah,
Owen unfortunately dies, but she was a
yeah.
Plaid supporter, if I remember. There's exciting stuff happening in the beginning of the 20s, things sort of which I think Plaid is a part of, as it always is in these
Yes,
days.
we wanted to place the blind in the context of the zeitgeist, as you say. Really,
Yeah,
you've got Kate Roberts, who was also an early member, uh, who published her first set of short stories in 1925. So things are buzzing culturally,
yeah,
and the founding of the blind is as a facet of that, really.
yeah, because you have Frost Rhys who won the National Eisteddfod at Pontypool in Gwent in 1924 with a poem about gay love, essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's a big a nationalist as well.
Oh,
So
he hasn't had the attention he deserves as a
no,
nationalist either,
no,
really,
no,
because he was editor of a Vanner, which was one of the most popular Welsh language newspapers, and he also was one who pushed for the amalgamation North and South, which happened in August 25.
yeah. So the founding of Plaid was a modernist
Yeah,
movement. It's not a matter of looking back. It's very much that the looking back at ways was something which the British parties are happy to do, of
exactly.
course.
Yeah, yeah.
So
This is what
Plaid
we
is looking
wanted to achieve
forward.
here. Yeah.
Yes, I mean it's a party. It's a pity it wasn't founded in 1905, same as the Basque National Party. But I think, as we discussed in the Welsh version of this podcast, I mean I think Wales needed the effects of the First World War and Irish independence, and then I think just dismay of the British parties
Yeah,
to
and
actually
the
just
generation and a new generation in a way
yes,
who had been disillusioned enough with
yeah.
the Britishness to be inspired to set up their own movement.
I mean that is important because I mean they're fervently anti-British. I know at the
Yeah,
time when Britishness is all pervasive, left or right, Christian, atheist, people still British.
yeah,
And then people hated Plaid Cymru because it didn't buy into the British lie.
yeah.
Um, I know this, I
That's the
remember I was,
revolutionary thing about setting up the blind.
yeah,
Really,
oh, absolutely,
is
totally. It's incredible how anti-British they are. And I remember when I was a town councillor for Plaid here in Aberystwyth in the 1990s.
hmm,
And is a very congenial council, there's no problems. But sometimes when issues of nationality came in and Britishness, you could see the split was between Plaid and then the rest, wasn't it? So
yeah,
the basically Labour, Liberal,
yeah,
slightly
yeah,
Tory people were together with the British, and Plaid was different. And imagine 1920s, at the height of the empire had never
yeah.
been
It
so
was.
big.
Yeah,
You had
yeah,
this tiny group of people saying, no, we don't believe this myth anymore. The empire has no clothes. We're not buying into this lie anymore. And that was very, very much hated by most Welsh people.
yeah.
And I think that's a lesson for us today. You don't have to always go with the flow. Um, Arwel Vittle, diolch yn fawr ti. Thanks for making time to come on the
No,
programme.
thanks. You don't.
The book is only in Welsh, so Dros Gymru'n Gwlad, it's on sale. It was launched last week. I'm sure if you see Arwel on the Eisteddfod field or whatever, he'll gladly sign a copy. But it's a
I
very
will.
interesting book. And I think at the point you made that these are young people, they're going against the grain, they're doing something which is
Yeah,
unpopular, very, very unpopular, uh, for what many people would see as offensive. At one stage, people could accept someone socialist, but they'd still be British. But
yeah.
to not be British gets to the heart of someone's
Yeah,
identity.
and that's a
And
sort of golden thread that continues today, really.
yes,
If you want some continuity, there is that.
yes, and I mean, and we continue being screwed by the Westminster Uni Party, left
Well,
or
that's
right.
it. Yeah,
They'll never put Wales first because they're playing the Westminster game and climbing the slippery slope for their own little careers
yeah,
in Westminster rather than making Wales a nation independent in Europe. Arwel
yeah.
Vittle, diolch ti am yr amser. Thanks again for making time to speak to me, Sean Jobbins, here on the Radio Yes Cymru podcast. Please give us 5 stars review, share with your friends and family, and keep the message for an independent Wales. Diolch yn fawr chi. Till next time, hwyl.